Hello, I'm using a new little service, so if you see anything that looks funky, my bad. Um, it's called Screenify. Let's see if this works. But hello, 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 hello. So my video for today is actually I have my camera blocking that, though I don't think that's what you can see, but I can see a camera there. Um, I'm doing Mark 8, um, and I put the Upside Down Kingdom. As you can see, an upside down kingdom. Also, don't mind me. I am sitting on the floor of my couch. If you hear my dog, that's my dog. Don't worry, he's just chilling, just being George. That's his name. So, to go into it, I did Mark 8, particularly Mark 8 from 11 to 38, with the end of 8, chapter 8. And I put it as the upside down kingdom. As you can see, I made the first slide upside down. Mark 8, the upside down kingdom. So, in the book of Mark, we see in general that we have some pressing matters, it's a short gospel, and particularly in Mark 8, we see an upside down kingdom, a glimpse of what that is. And this was foreign to the people of the ancient Near East then, and it is foreign to us today, which I'll explain a little bit more later on. Also, I have following artwork, as you can see, all of it from Google and from Free Domain. So, doing the lesson, I would do a background first. I would use a multitude of resources. To begin with, I am a huge fan of the SBL Bible. It's the updated NRSV HarperCollins Study Bible. It's just the updated version from the Study of Biblical Languages. I believe that's what they're called. This resource has been great for using this, as it uses scholarly work in the bottom, as you all would know. And so, one, I would point that out and use that as a resource. I'm going to move this camera over here real quick, so don't mind me. If you see the camera, I have no idea. And so, obviously, I put notes up here, and this is what, in a sense, this class would see, and also kind of telling what I'd be talking about. So I'd be talking about the background of how speedy Mark is. It's super quick, obviously, as we know. The quickest and the most likely the oldest out of the four Gospels. And we can see that through use of stories in Matthew and Luke, for examples. And starting with this expediting of Jesus' ministry, it feels like in chapter 114, we see that Jesus is already on the move. We get no birth story like Matthew and Luke. And so it just feels very expedited. Another theme that plays well into... Sorry, someone was calling me. Another theme that plays well into Mark 8 is the theme of mystery and secrecy throughout it. Jesus tells the disciples multiple times, such as in chapter 4, 5, 6, be quiet. Don't tell people what happened. Whether he healed someone, etc., etc. It's creating an air of mystery and secrecy. Well, why is he doing that? That's a great question. These might show a goal for the good news, from the good news that Mark wants to spread. The goal is to create some anxiety, to create in a good way, to get people to be like, we need to spread the good news, just as the disciples wanted to say too. But even though they wanted to say the good news, they wanted to say a different one. So let's start with 8:11 through 38. We have the Pharisees and the disciples. And what I would do is I would have us read the entirety of chapter... Yeah, we would read the entirety of chapter 8. We would have read the Jesus feeding the 4,000. Obviously, a very popular story. Not quite as popular as the first feeding of the few thousand. But the next part, where I'll get to, is the demand for a sign from the Pharisees. Jesus obviously tells them, no, I'm not going to give you a sign. What does this generation want a sign? Ironically, he just gave a sign a little bit by doing such a great miracle beforehand. But we won't get into that. The next part we see the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod, and that's how it's titled in the NRSV. Going from there, we see how Jesus gets upset that they think that he's talking about bread with the yeast of the Pharisees. And with the resource of the SBL Bible, we have that this was a common saying, a symbol of widespread corruption hidden within humans, yeast, which that makes sense with Jewish societies of unleavened bread, so that kind of makes sense. What he's trying to say is that they're hypocrites. And he gets really frustrated at the very end with the Pharisees. In 21, then he said to them, "Do you not yet understand?" So much frustration with, not the Pharisees, I meant with the disciples. And then we go to Jesus cures the blind man at Bethsaida. Next, going to the next slide. 8 through 22, 8:22 through 26. This story is interesting because Jesus, one, uses his saliva to heal a blind man, and he does it twice, 2 attempts. Which also, another benefit of the SBL Bible, we see a viewpoint they put and embarrassing stories. So this was not added to Matthew, Luke. And that's a great question. Why? Why not? Because it could be embarrassing. That's a great example. But I think this placement has a great opportunity to show the lesson that we're getting at. Jesus heals this blind man. Okay, and in 25, then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently. Well, this is after the second time. This is the second time, intently, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And then he sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village." Again, there's that secrecy. Doesn't want them to tell the village, as he's been doing to the disciples many a time. This symbol could easily be pairing with, quite possibly, the placement, that Mark used this story right after the disciples not yet understanding, and then going to Peter's declaration about Jesus, and then Jesus rebuking Peter. We could possibly see that this is trying to hint at the disciples being blind. This is the frustratingness that Jesus has to do. So Jesus is multiple times trying to wipe away the blindness from the disciples. After that, we see Peter's declaration that he is the Messiah. Now, the Messiah would be a different type of thought than what we have and of today, though I would say we have somewhat the same thought in many ways. We think of Jesus as loving and kind, but that's not what the goal maybe for the disciples was. When Peter declares Jesus as the Messiah, it's probably more than that for him, more of taking over and power and control, as we see later on as he cuts the soldier's ear off and when they're trying to arrest him. Jesus then foretells his death and resurrection. Then he began to teach them that the Son of God, and also ignore my wife, she's just coming on in. Jesus teaches them about that he must die and then be raised again in 3 days. After that, we see Peter take him aside and rebuke him. But Jesus then says the famous line, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Wild stuff, okay? So Peter did something right and then gets rebuked right afterwards. Then we hear after that Jesus saying, what you should be doing. "If any of you wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake, for the sake of the gospel, will save it." What is Mark trying to communicate? I feel like that very end is exactly what he wants us to know. Mark's gospel shows Jesus communicating a different, ignore the typo, communicating a different kingdom than what the disciples are used to, what they're thinking of. They're thinking of someone of the Davidic line, which Jesus is, as mentioned in Matthew and Luke, though the beginning of Mark does not do that. Wait, does it? Let me correct that. I can't remember. Let me correct it. I don't believe it does. But being so, They want a great nation out of Israel. It's really about Israel. Jesus is thinking more than Israel, obviously, of divine things. Jesus shows that it's deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Complete opposite of what they're wanting to do. And the disciples have been blind to seeing this. And that's why I believe the placement of Jesus curing the blind man at Bethsaida could be an example of a symbol to the disciples. They demand a sign. Just they're not different than the Pharisees. That's kind of what Mark is getting at. And so Jesus has to state this kingdom is different. It's upside down. Hence why the saying the upside down kingdom. What does that mean for us today? Great question. The exact same thing. For this message, I don't think we're very much different. There's so many things you can go into about how you can interpret it in, I guess, a few different ways. But it really just hits the nail the exact same way. I can look right now into politics. I can look right now into religious infighting. My wife being from Northern Ireland, I think about the Protestant and the Catholics of Northern Ireland. I think of the Crusades. What's the point of taking the power? And that's my dog, George. Say hi to George. And we have that struggle still today. People want religious power within the government. But would Jesus want that? That's a great question, But I think we can define it really well by looking at this upside down kingdom he talks about, denying themselves. It's not about us at all. It's about the benefit of others. And so the upside down kingdom is not one of this power. It's not one of his signs and strength. It's more calm. It's more quiet. And that's, I think, it's a beautiful lesson for us to learn from Christ, who suffered on the cross to bring that to us. So I would explain it all like that. At the very end, I would want to see where the class, how they felt gripping with this, wrestling with this upside down kingdom. What does that look like for them today, too? Besides just what I've said, where did they see that? Where did they see places where we've failed to deny our own selves? For example, I'm going to look at myself. I'm scared of money. I mean, I think everybody in the U.S. is. I'm so scared of money. And I wouldn't say I'm not generous at all. I donate to church. I tithe, obviously. I donate most of my secondhand stuff. Obviously brought well within my my family to do those things. But I get nervous. So where do I deny myself into showing the cross? Where do we give up our things and to show that we love others by doing the exact same as Jesus? So it's going to be, obviously, the goal would make it a difficult lesson for those that are listening. So that way they see deep down, where can I change? But yeah, that would be my interpretation of this story. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the discussion board. Thanks. Also, I having trouble.